Hey there, art sluts, it's Allison Moon, and you're listening to Artgasm, the podcast all about the intersections of sexuality and art. It has been a whirlwind 2 weeks for me personally. I had my birthday. I turned 37 years old. I have to admit, I never thought I'd make it this far. I'm kind of thrilled that I have. But yeah, so I'm 37 years old now. That's weird. But in this 2 weeks, I have had a really interesting amount of cool news. Only none of it I can really share right now, to be perfectly honest. It's all in that kind of like, the ink is not dry, so I cannot share any of the interesting news that's happening yet. But I can share one thing, which is that the reading of my new play, The Tip of the Tongue, which was in the Come Inside Theater Festival here in Portland, Oregon, went really, really well. It was terrifying. I think I was holding my breath for a solid 90 minutes, but it was a really beautiful experience to see actors make my words come to life, offer nuance and compassion to characters that have only until now lived in my head, and to watch an audience engage with the story. It just reminded me of why I love writing and why I love writing dramatic pieces. So if you are one of those audience members, thank you so much for coming. It meant the world to me to see such an engaged, enthusiastic, intelligent audience. And for everyone who stayed afterwards to offer me feedback, I really appreciate that. I've been working on integrating the feedback notes yesterday and today. I'm going to keep on doing it, and I'm hoping to have a final draft of this play to turn into my producer friend type person soon, real soon. And that's because of the amazing notes that were given to me by the actors, and then also the amazing notes that were given to me by the live audience. So thank you for that. If you are a performer, if you have a solo show, if you have any sort of show around sexuality, I recommend checking out the Come Inside Theater Festival. It was a really cool run with a lot of great shows. I saw a couple of shows that were really wonderful, and I just encourage you to submit. You can become a member of their mailing list, and you can learn more when they open submissions for next year's festival. But the audiences were really enthusiastic. And this was my first real experience with the Portland theater scene, so it was fun to encounter it from the perspective of, here's my thing, give me feedback. So it was a really nice experience all around. And one of my favorite parts about it was that Dirty Lola, who was a guest on, I think, episode 3 of this podcast way back, she was staying with us during the run because she was doing her show Sex At a Go-Go, which we talked about on the podcast. I was a guest one of the nights, and so I got to experience Sex At a Go-Go from the inside, which was really nice. And we talked a lot about New York City, and it made me remember that I have been sitting on this interview with Jay Sullivan for months, and I have not released it because I just hadn't found the right rhythm for it yet, but I found it, and I want you to hear it now. Now, this interview may be a little bit more oblique when it comes to sexuality than usual. We have a lot of people on this podcast who talk very specifically about sex in their work, which I love and I think is wonderful. What I enjoyed about my conversation with Brendan is that he's a great conversationalist, and it kind of is a meandering conversation. We touch on a lot of different topics that are very sensuous, more so than they are sexual, which I actually think is really wonderful. So we start talking about his career as a club kid, becoming a DJ with Lady Gaga, and then kind of moves into this really kind of open-ended conversation on identity and sensuality and underground art and labels. And I just really had a great time talking to Brendan. And I really enjoyed kind of indulging in discussing New York. I'm one of those people who has a really strong sensual reaction to place. This is why I love to travel, and this is why I love getting to know different cities. And New York is one of those really sexy cities that is incredibly hard to leave. It's also incredibly hard to be in. It's a complex city. It's like just that ex that you can never really break free from completely, even though you know she's no good for you. Yeah, that's my relationship with New York City. So I really enjoy having this conversation with him. That's how this conversation started. It was we were talking about just the sensuousness of New York, and I want to honor New Yorkers and the beauty of New Yorkers. Obviously, 9/11's anniversary was not too long ago, and recently there was a violent beating of white supremacists beating New Yorkers, and I just want to honor the diversity, the tenacity, and the beauty that is present in a city where there are so many people from so many different places living together and sharing their love or their devotion to place. I think there's a lot to be said for that. And I think that that's the kind of bond that is far more important than the bond of the color of your skin or the beliefs that you have about who's better than who. So, yeah, so this is a little bit of a love letter to New York City. In the interview, you will hear a rumbling every once in a while. That's because Brendan's apartment is right over top a subway. So if that little bassiness kind of comes and goes, that's part of the recording. And it's just part of living in New York City. All right, without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Brendan J. Sullivan. Brendan.
Hi.
Hi.
It's so good to see you in New York.
It's nice to see you too. It's nice to be in New York.
Yeah? Do you have the New York feeling?
Every time I come to New York, I have the New York feeling.
Okay,
it's
good.
just there's so much romance in the air.
Good.
The one thing is I definitely noticed that I need to leave before the pulse gets to be so much that I get antsy.
Yes. Oh, that so happens. Yes. When you have the day off in New York and it's great weather like this, like you almost don't need a jacket, or you can just walk around in your cool leather jacket, you know?
Which is exactly what I brought.
Yeah, and everybody's at work. And that's a cool jacket, actually. And everybody's at work, and so the city's kind of yours. You don't have to wait in line for anything. You can ride any subway. You can get a table at any restaurant, go to museums and whatever. It's all there. I love it. I do.
Yeah, it's nice. I've been running in the park, and that's like the most New York thing I could possibly imagine doing.
It's the most luxurious thing.
Yeah,
also.
I love it.
I love Central Park. I never get up there enough. Remind me to come back to Central Park later, but we'll talk about it. Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah, I read an interview with you on my way over here where you were talking about like two places where you want to feel like you can get away from the city that are in the city. One of them which is the Boathouse, I think, right? So, and then the other one, which is on the Hudson River. What's that?
Oh gosh, I forgot about that. I missed that. I haven't been there in honestly a couple of years. Yeah, there's like a regular like People's Yacht Club on the west side of the city, but you can go there like as if you're like a country club or yacht club member.
Oh wow!
And go, and it's for like people to like have a place that their kids can like too. So you can go and like get a hot dog and a beer and sit there and just watch ships come in the sunset and the.
Oh my God.
It's beautiful.
That sounds fantastic.
It's really wonderful. And it's one of those things where like it's just far off the beaten track that like they try to attract people. So like reasonable prices, you can sort of walk around anywhere you want. If they're closed, you can just go sit and watch the sunset.
Oh my God, that sounds fantastic. Yeah, I mean like that's just like a straight shot from where I stay when I'm in the city. So it's like, I mean across town. I'd have to walk across the park, but that's not a terrible way to be.
59 Boat Basin, yeah.
Yeah. The Boat Basin, that's right.
Yeah. It's beautiful. It's like very civic and old stone and everything. It's wonderful.
Oh, that sounds great. Yeah, I love those places in New York that are just so old. And so, I mean, that's the thing, like New York is so much a city about change, which once you embrace that, it feels okay, but you can still have that nostalgia for like, oh, that place that used to be there.
Yeah.
So when you see places that are old and have the same crew that's been working there since like the 60s, it just has a whole new romance to the city.
It's so true. New York is like a magic trick. Like if you focus like too hard on it, you're going to miss it, you know? Like, so if you only worry about like, oh, that place closed because it's on the way home from work and I care about it because I went there with this person, you totally miss the like, we still have a subway system from the 1920s, you know, like light bulbs tell us when we can go, you know, and like, and there are so many old institutions. The city itself is one of the old institutions. Yeah. It's amazing how much it doesn't change, if anything.
Yeah. Did you ever go to Merc Bar?
No, where was that?
That's on next to the Mercer Hotel.
Okay.
Or below the Mercer Hotel. But Reed used to work there.
Okay.
So he worked there for like 15 years as bartender.
Did he really?
After Sandy, I think it was condemned because of, and so they tore the whole thing down. And so the last time we were in the city randomly. Again, we don't visit the city very often. We live in the West Coast. So we were in the city randomly for a thing that Reed was doing about polyamory. And we found out that the last night of Merc Bar was when we were in town.
Oh, I love that party.
It was, and we went over there, and people were in the street it was like on one of those beautiful cobblestone streets. In the street partying, and every regular that ever came to Merc Bar over the how many 30 years it was open came and hung out. And so at one point, Reed, they invite him back behind the bar, and so he starts bartending, and we're just like, "Oh my God, this is amazing!"
Priceless.
It was extraordinary. I'm so glad we got to be there. I mean, it was such a touching night. I mean, I barely knew anybody there because I never lived here. But then all these regulars, everybody was just loving each other and hugging. People were taking fixtures off the wall because it was that kind of thing.
That happened in our neighborhood in Fort Greene, where we are now. There was a restaurant called Madiba, named after it's a South African restaurant. And they'd been there for years, and they opened two white South Africans opened a South African restaurant in a black neighborhood. And people came, and it was the last night. People would come in and they would say, "We wanted to hate you guys so much when you opened, but I met my wife here, my sister met her husband here, I made friends. Some people got out of prison and met there, and they were like, we started a new life here, and this was home for us when we were the most forgotten neighborhood, the buildings were falling down, but we had this place." And that was the perfect final night party. They drank the bar dry. People were passing around the weird liqueurs that never, the vermouth and all that stuff that never gets finished.
Yeah.
And then people were coming from I thought that was going to be it. People were coming from the bodega, just passing out cans of beer because just no one wanted to leave. They had a landlord thing. And they're doing an auction for the neighborhood now. They're trying to give as much of the furniture and the plateware and stuff away to, people around here.
Oh, wow. That's so special.
It's beautiful. The owner got up. And there's a piano in there. And he said, when I grew up in South Africa under apartheid, a lot of musicians, the cool thing then was to boycott. And we all thought it was great, but it meant for us growing up there that we could never see, music.
Right.
And so there was this place in Botswana on the border where you could go, and Freddie Mercury would come down and he would say, "I'm glad you all could make it across the border, and I just want to say, fuck apartheid."
Oh my God.
And then he would go into, but then the owner just started on the piano doing Bohemian Rhapsody. Got the whole crowd going. It was so beautiful.
Wow. That sounds amazing. So yeah, I mean, I'm so happy to talk to you about obviously New York, but also about, your experience of coming of age here. And I'm curious how you found your way into, I guess you could call it the underground or, club scene or whatever you'd call it.
Yeah, I remember. So let's see, I turned, 21 in, 2003. So it was the end of the Peter Gatien era of nightlife, the club kids and the, Limelight and Palladium and all these big mega places in Tonal Club, which was in the movie Kids. And there were these big cathedrals of nightlife where just everybody came, but it always had the element of people coming in from out of town. It was almost as if the nightlife at that time was no different from if you knew a kid whose parents were out of town and just everybody went over to that house to party,
Yeah.
And it was becoming less about the music that I cared about. And then somewhere over around 2001 was when, it was right after 9/11, was this attitude of well, we're here and we're not going anywhere, so what are we going to do? And that was when there was that resurgence, and they called it a lot of things at the time, but that's when we got LCD sound system. That's when all of a sudden the Killers were getting big. And the Strokes were just beyond the biggest band in the world, even though they couldn't record again and they couldn't get a tour together, but they were just so legendary because you would go somewhere and people would just be the Strokes were in here 10 minutes ago. You'd be oh my God, no social media.
Yeah.
You would almost wait until 7 p.m. before you called someone so you could use your nighttime minutes on your cell phone. It was just different. And because of that, I felt very alienated from the mainstream system because it seemed to be older people trying to force us to agree upon what was music or what was fun or what you wanted to do at night. And so there were these big mega clubs, and they were so expensive, and they were expensive to get into because they were used to that economy of outsiders coming in, they don't know what's cool or where to go, so they go, it's like a movie, they pay a ticket, they take the ride, And so I was very at the time I was living in Williamsburg and then I moved to Fort Greene, and we had all these huge spaces. And the idea was like, why pay to get into a nightclub and pay to get drinks, to do all this stuff, to hear music that has nothing to do with you, when we could take over one of these spaces and we could do whatever we want. And at that time, there was like a lot of like burlesque was on the rise, and there were these great spaces, and there was fire breathers, and just every circus element imaginable was coming. And the beers were like $2 out of a can, out of a cooler. And it was in that underground that I first started working with Lady Gaga. We just sort of met, and we just met, and we talked about music, and it was that great moment. When I started in music, it was still like the radio era, and so it was still this idea of like, oh, you can't play hip hop and rock. You can't play dance or disco or, the rave music and then play R&B. It's like the world was trying to divide us at the time, but everybody my age had an iPod, and you just could not possibly fill that thing with enough music. So it was no longer about making a mixtape or mix CD of 12 good songs. It was like, give me all the music in the world. So everybody you knew was consuming this music.
And the shuffle feature on iPad. I mean, I remember I never listened to a single after a single after a single until the iPod, when it was just like every song you love or every song you're curious about on shuffle. I stopped listening to albums around then,
Exactly. It mixed everything up in this like really interesting way. And then you would see what moved and what worked together. Now, at the time, I was feeling very alienated because, radio music was terrible then, and it was almost like, oh, you don't know what this is, you don't know what this is, and it's like, why would you care what these, like, Hawaiian shirt-wearing radio DJs think is cool, But the magic of music, which I didn't quite get then, is called resonance. Like, when I was talking about Bohemian Rhapsody, they played a few notes from it, and just the place went silent, and everyone just got right in tune. And in resonance is when you play, like if you just sang in front of a piano, you would force, just through the nature of music itself, even if you're like a little off key, you would force one of those notes to vibrate a little bit, just your voice and the sympathetic vibration of that. And what I was missing all the time before then was that if something could stir a feeling in me in music, and it could stir a feeling in someone else in music, then the two of us had more in common than we knew. Wow. So it was like I would go out and I would hear and I would listen to music. And if people were talking, if they stopped talking and like sort of just like moved to a song, especially if they'd never heard it before, just something about it, just on a primal level. David Byrne in Stop Making Sense, his big like shoulder pads movie, he what he said is like he wanted to make his head smaller and his body bigger, because oftentimes with music, your body understands it before your head does. And it just moves you. And so in this movement, that's when I really connected with Gaga, because everybody wanted to be pure hard rock and roll, or everybody was pure like dance music before EDM. And the two of us were like, we want to talk about music. We want to talk about what's awesome. We don't care if it's cool.
So as a DJ, that sounds like what you're talking about is trying to help facilitate that resonance for a room full of people.
Yeah. A lot of times, whether you're DJing a sock hop for your kid's elementary school or you're in the biggest club there is, people will sort of come in and say sort of like, oh, people would dance if you did this. People would dance if you did this. And I think every DJ gets annoyed by that. But what I've always found is like, if you just like keep your eye out for what's resonating and you watch, and you'll be like, okay, everyone's talking, it's early, or I've never been to this town, I don't know what's going on here. If you just watch and you see like, okay, that girl's like dancing a little bit to this, and that guy over there, they don't even know each other, but they're both moving. They're totally separate groups. Like if I just keep going with that vibe, I think they're going to lead the room to move. So it's not about like, anybody can play a single song and fill the dance floor. A jukebox can do that, But keeping people moving and keeping them moving together is the real art of DJing.
Yeah, it's, this interesting, the analogy is so simple, where it's like just like a great lover, you have to listen to what works and go with that.
Yes.
Like I've definitely been on dance floors where it's like I'm surrounded by the sex, like I lived in Oakland for years, and I went to a queer dance party where it's just the most beautiful people. Oakland is filled with the most beautiful people. Queers who are there, who are like just feeling each other. They're totally, the vibe was in the space, and then the DJ started and killed the room. And I was just like, and then I was like, with that moment of like, it doesn't matter how good looking everybody is and how sexual everybody feels. If the person who's supposed to kind of take us on this journey isn't listening to us, I'm not feeling it. And nobody was feeling it. It was so sad. And then, of course, the counterpoint of when you go to a party where it's like, you don't really know if everybody feels it. Everybody's kind of awkward. Maybe it's a bunch of people standing around just trying to be looked at. And then when the DJ starts, they can make an experience happen. They can take people on a journey. It's a powerful place to be.
Yeah. I've been thinking about that a lot. I'm working with a group in New York City called House of Yes, which is like sex positive, queer focused, and but with the idea that anybody can come in here and be part of what we're doing. And we've been throwing around a lot of ideas recently, and I was talking to someone about, trying to work with us, and they came up with this idea, which they were saying, they were talking about people dancing as sexuality, and the problem they found most is that guys don't dance. And I was like, is that rude? Is it sexist? Or is there something more in there that we can look at? And which is what I did. And I was thinking about when I do see people out at night, the group, what that group I was talking about in the very beginning of, that the one girl on the other side of the room, she starts to dance. She and her friends are going to have a ton of fun dancing, and they're going to make it fun for everyone else. And what I've noticed lately in nightlife is there's all these things of are people going to flirt? Are people still going to go out? Are people going to do this? And it's always been the question to me has been are we doing the dance right? Are we having fun together, or is your version of fun not are you not having fun unless you have your version of fun, as opposed to watching people have fun? I think the reason I've survived in nightlife this long is I really do just enjoy it. I do like to just go to a room and look at people smiling and dancing in outfits. I love when a DJ plays a song I've never heard in my life and the room goes wild. It's one of the great benefits of New York is you could never keep up with it. You might think you go out every night so you know what's going on, and then you go to go next door to where you always go out, and you're like, what is this music? Who are these people?
It's so interesting too, because I think I read an interview with you where you were talking about EDM and how EDM is the first kind of attempt at, or not attempt, but the first true global music.
Yeah. Earlier when I was saying, New York became very rock and roll in 2001 or so. And that was pushed a little bit by blogs and local music scene papers, the Village Voice, stuff like that. But yeah, it was the Strokes and then all these bands in Williamsburg and even bands from other countries. Franz Ferdinand came here to record. The Fire Furnaces came here to record. This is the worst place in the world to record. I mean, it's a great scene. But, it took us 20 minutes to get this microphone set up. Just to get it away from where the subway rumbles beneath my building. EDM in a way, and I did see a beautiful animation, which I'll try to send you to link to when this goes up. Just the way that African rhythms become the New Orleans sound, and the New Orleans sound moves over to Chicago, and Chicago turns to blues, and blues turns into rock and roll, and all this that beautiful lineage continued with EDM, and it just went global. It was the world's first global music phenomenon. I think when what we call rock and roll really did spread, and it did, in a way, it was like a mistranslation almost, or a misinterpretation at every level. And EDM in itself isn't. I'm not going to say it's because EDM's perfect. I'm going to say because it was the first time when your access was not limited by your abilities. It wasn't because you could get into the big recording studio or get with the great producer. Most of our classic EDM songs, including Lord Royals, were done on basically shoplifted software, stolen internet software on an old computer. And of course, most of the world still doesn't have access to computers, but those who do have access to something that was usually only the top selling millionaire bands could get of that studio time.
Yeah, it's the democratization of that the internet has given to pretty much all art forms, right? I write books, and I self-published all 4 of them because I could for the first time. I couldn't have done that, even 10, 15 years ago. And so I wonder if as the democratization of these tools happen, does that mean there's no underground anymore? It's just all
God, it's so funny. Are we all underground now? God, I'm an author as well, and I did my first book with a major publishing house, which is a great moment for me. And the more I think about it, though, when I have a new idea that I don't know if I can sell them, now more than ever, I'd be like, then I'm just going to do it. Like I'm sure I can sell 1,000 copies, something like that. Now, is there no underground anymore? What's surprising is the same way that it used to be like, there might have only been the Tonight Show for comedy and then underground comedy clubs.
Right.
The way it is now, it's like culture is atomized. Like it's everywhere. It's not in these like spigots of that provide it, where you have to go. We're no longer going to the fountain to bring, the jug of water home. It's in our homes and it's everywhere. But it is so hard to find the good news stuff now. It's so easy to get trapped in your little niche because everything about it just reinforces it, which I think in a way is why viral things that we call viral now are so exciting. And I don't think we had what we currently call viral things. Things might have been a hit, like in the 90s, like the Got Milk ads or something like that. Yeah. And they were so ubiquitous, you couldn't avoid them. The thing about viral, there's usually 3 levels to viral. I spend a lot of time thinking about this. What we call viral usually begins with a person, like a tastemaker, a person of influence. And it might even be like Jimmy Kimmel says, like, oh, my guy says this is the funniest video he's ever seen. So more people see it. And then those people have a moment where they decide, is this the same thing Jimmy Kimmel always says to me, or that I would expect here? Or was there an element of surprise it wasn't ready for? And the surprise element is the one that's most exciting to me because it's the only one we're all in control of.
Interesting.
If you're going to create art or a podcast or a new book or something like that, part of you is going to want to be like, what do people want? What are they going to buy? Like, what am I doing that someone else is doing that maybe I think I do it better? So let me get ahead of them. But usually the person who's first has the surprise element, even if it's not a truly original concept. But you as an artist always have the surprise element because if you're willing to like take a risk on your own work, you're willing to let it surprise other people.
Well, I feel like it also comes from this. I mean, there's a kind of cynicism that I feel like is just kind of always growing in our culture, right? There's this, we're just kind of now seeing everything as advertising. We have much better filters for that kind of thing in some ways, although with quote unquote fake news and all that, I think we're losing some of our ability to discern. But I think that there's this kind of, at least the belief that I have, that like if it's a true expression, if it's truly a pure expression of the way you see the world, like there's going to be other people that resonate with that. And again, back when it was only 5 publishing houses or the radio stations that were actually able to disseminate information to the world, you had to resonate with gatekeepers in a different way. Now it's like you might be into a thing that only like a couple hundred people around the world are into. But they're going to find it. Yeah. And they're going to resonate with it. And as long as you're coming from a real place, you're going to find those people who are into that same expression, which I find fascinating. And I think, with viral, we might be seeing connections in new ways where it's like, wow, like I didn't realize that's, 12 million people would find this surprising in the same way.
Yeah. I put up a video maybe a year ago that I honestly just thought like, this is something of interest to me. And I get 25 million views of people just like connecting with each other of something that I didn't think was certainly not the focus of mainstream music at the time. And I was blown away by it. What I was thinking about, I connected with someone recently. He was an editor at the New York Observer. And I invited him over to my house last week because the Jimmy Cliff movie, The Harder They Come, the spaghetti Western based in Jamaica. And it's about that. It's about radio stations and access and the not the publishing houses, but the record companies in Jamaica at the time. They controlled all the access. And then the police would control the drug trade and all these people controlling everything when the people just want to be free. Now, the interesting thing about inviting him over is he's a person I respect and he's a writer that I've known. I've been reading his stuff for probably 15 years, but he's a conservative. And he is a, I guess he's a punk rock conservative. He's, we agree on music and we agree that the banks are the real criminals. But he worked for Jared Kushner at the New York Observer. I've known him for a very long time. I've never once felt like he said anything rude, racist, out of bound, homophobic, transphobic. And I've always felt like I could talk to him. Like he's a resource and a person in my area. And I've always felt like I could be like, oh yeah, sure. Every racist person I think is an idiot, but and I'm going to leave that alone. But like, I think this banking policy is terrible. I need to ask a conservative why anybody would ever vote for this. And I can come to him with that.
Right.
And more than often than not, he's like, yeah, that's a terrible policy.
Yeah. But it's helpful that you have those people. I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about right now with, I'm getting the kind of cynicism. I want to verb the word cynical.
Cynicization.
Cynicization, exactly. But I also feel like, it's kind of talking about the difference between experiencing the world through, our laptops and our phones versus experiencing the world through personal connection. Like the more and more I realize how much Facebook fucks up my life, the more I'm striving for having like conversations. Like I could do this with you on Skype, but I want to be in the room with you because I find that it's so much easier to have a conversation with people when you can truly like look them in the eye and like smell them. It changes things. And I'm so hungry for that kind of connection with people. And I'm an introvert and I'm shy. I'm a homebody, but still like
But like instead of logging on to like get a little, a little human fix, like if you could just go outside, that's why I love living in a city. I mean, you go to, Zach Galifianakis actually told me this one time after a comedy show where I was talking to him. He said that his dad told him, whenever you're depressed, just go talk to old people in the park.
Oh.
Like they don't watch your movies. They don't listen to your podcast. They didn't buy your book. They talk. All they're gonna care about in their years is it a nice weather? Is it not? Are the birds out? Is it not? Is that? Oh, are those kids getting grown? And I've tried actually, and I've been on this. I've been trying and failing at this for many years. But if I think about the thing that makes me the happiest over the time I've lived in Brooklyn, I have developed very in-depth relationships with the homeless people in my neighborhood. Some for like 15 years.
Wow.
And one person recently, I came out of my stoop and she was sitting there with another person, and I actually said, and I work with homeless advocacy groups, but I said to them, I was like, hi guys, there's a child in our building with special needs, so I'd really appreciate it if there weren't, strangers camped out waiting, when she gets home from school alone. And they were like, okay, they get kicked off every day. And a week later, she was asleep on the neighbor's stoop because she wouldn't sleep on ours because I asked her politely. And she caught someone stealing my bike and she called the cops.
Oh, wow.
And if you come out of the world of being like, oh, screw that person who was rude to me that one time or the whatever.
Right.
And instead you think about these people in my community, these are my neighbors, these are my watchful eyes, these are, if I saw something bad happen to them, I would look out for them. And so she and I became friends this year. Nice. And she is a victim of the opioid epidemic. She has a young son. She's been up and down. She told me all about her life. And when I've had tough times this year, I think a lot of us have not always known what to do in the last maybe 2 years and stuff, especially if you are looking online for answers. I've noticed that like even when I'm stressed about money, if I just go and take her grocery shopping for the day, I feel so much better than I would if I went to some overpriced wine bar or went out to the new cool restaurant or something like that. Just making that connection and being like, I know I can't solve all my problems today. But boy, there are times in my life where I wish someone could have stepped in and helped me out. So today I'm going to be that person. That makes me feel so much better because the neighborhood feels bigger. I feel like when I go outside, I'm not, okay, what is next? What's the traffic? What's going on? I'm like, hey, I wonder if I'll see Anne. And when I share that story with people, when they come over and visit, a lot of them are like kind of excited. They're like, I wonder who's going to be in the subway. Is it going to be Ren's friend Anne? Is she going to be hanging out? I don't sometimes we look online for answers. Like YouTube is the second largest search engine in the world after Google, which owns it. And people go on there to say like, how do I cook this? How do I fix this? How do I, am I going to like this pomade? Am I going to, all this stuff. And we look online for answers all the time. And especially with the way we share news socially now, and we don't always find it. And I think it's sometimes because we're looking for it in the wrong place.
Well, I feel like that, in my experience, it comes from seeing people as concepts rather than as, and so I think, one of the big, I think, issues that we have right now in America is this increasing need to label things, but at the same time, how like labels can be incredibly liberating. And I think people have a really strong there's a interesting contrast between how we feel about labels, right? So it's like if I'm coming out and I'm like, well, I'm a lesbian now, it's like I'm going to go to the lesbian bar and I'm going to find lesbian friends and I'm going to go on Tinder and I'm going to look for women because I like all of that. I find like I talk about that all the time in my work, like how labels can be so important for people who are trying to find their people. But at a certain point, for everyone, labels become incredibly problematic. They can become shackles, right? Because now we start policing those labels, and we now start using those labels as like, are you in? Are you out? Do you understand the new ways?
So true.
And so, in your experience of like seeing somebody as, okay, like, oh, just, a homeless person on my stoop versus like, oh, this is Anne. She's experiencing homelessness right now. And she's got so many other things going on.
I sent an email to some friends around Christmas and I said, why don't we make Anne's Christmas really special this year? She's moving into a new home and I'm going to make an Amazon list of all the stuff she needs. And I didn't mean to like put it in her face like this, but I sent it to Anne and she was like, it's so funny. You met me because I was asleep on your stoop. I've been homeless the whole time you knew me until now. And until I read, you saying, let's help this homeless woman, I didn't think of myself as homeless. And it's funny that I don't think most of us do think of ourselves in labels. We present the labels. It's a performance in a way. Which is why, the last 15 years of queer culture have just made me more impressed with human society than anything, because it is people living beyond labels, including saying, I don't have the label that you might think I have, and I know this might be difficult for now, but I'm going to stand up for the people who are the younger people behind me who don't have that as part of their lexicon, and they might feel a certain way on the inside and no one around them is using those words around them. Gosh, it is so weird though.
Well, because I feel like, and again, like I think it's a part of natural development, especially around like sexual labels or gender labels for that matter. But, I think what's happening, especially in queer space, and you may have experienced this too when you were coming of age in like the underground lore, it's like you only had a couple of spaces. So it's like the queers, we're hanging out with the straights, we're hanging out with like the trans people, we're hanging out. Like it was just really easy to interface because there were only so many spaces. And then what happened is we started bifurcating those spaces. So now this is a gay bar. This is a lesbian bar.
Yeah.
This is where the trans people hang out. Trans women hang out. This is where, and so it was just, and I think there's again, value in that because you're like, I need to go out and I need to be around my people. But then it starts to become like, well, are your people only lesbians? Or are your people, can your people be, genderqueers or intersect? Yeah. And we're experiencing, I find this kind of need to have both. I want to be able to walk into a space and know what I'm going to find. But I also enjoy being surprised, right? Like I was a lesbian for years and then I fell in love with a cis man and now I'm queer and I feel more comfortable around places where people can hold that complexity of who I am.
Yeah.
Right? And they don't think that, oh, you must have been confused. It's like, no, like we're all kind of that, right? Or we all kind of get that, even if you're not that.
Yeah. It's something funny about this. God, I could take any angle in this and I would love to all day. I did gender theory as a major in college because I found it fascinating as a cis straight male to be in a room and be like, I don't know, like everybody in this room is a huger expert just in living than I am on the thing I want to learn about today. One thing I've been thinking about recently is, so you know how we seem to be policing each other's diets online recently?
Yeah.
It's because maybe like maybe you're going to try paleo for a week, right? And so you Instagram your paleo food or your celiac or something like that. You feel a certain way inside, and so you want to do something about it in life. It's so weird how people police each other's diets. Also, recently, speaking of New York, I have a very close friend who's packing it in, and she and her partner they said, we did 15 years in New York. We want to see what else is out there. We're going to take a road trip. We're going to be nomads for a while. We're going to probably settle down in like Austin or something. I noticed that instead of thinking, oh, good for you and your partner, you're doing something together, my immediate response was to be slightly annoyed. And I was like, I'm just going to quietly think about this and not say anything rude to my friend who's moving. And I thought about it, and I was like, it's sort of like when you ask a friend, like, hey, I haven't seen you in weeks. Do you want to get a drink after work? And they might be like, actually, I'm on a cleanse. And I would be like, that I would be just as annoyed if they were on a cleanse. Not because I don't want them to be healthy and happy, but for a second there, if you're not interrogating it, it feels like a personal attack. It feels like they're saying like, oh, one must not get drinks after work if they want to be healthy and beautiful and have great skin, you know? And you're like,